Leah lived a quiet, unassuming life in the household of her father, Laban, in the arid land of Haran, where the sun scorched the earth and the landscape stretched out in endless waves of sandy hills and sparse pastures. The air was dry, carrying the scent of dust and the faint musk of grazing sheep, their bleats a constant backdrop to the daily rhythm of life. The family compound was a modest cluster of tents and mud brick structures, their beige walls blending seamlessly with the surrounding desert, the only color coming from the occasional patch of wildflowers that clung stubbornly to life. Leah spent her days in toil, her hands roughened by the coarse wool she spun into thread, her fingers stained with the dye she used to color the fabric, her back aching from the weight of the clay jars she carried from the well. The well itself was a communal gathering place, a stone-ringed oasis where the women of Haran met to draw water and exchange stories, their laughter echoing through the still air. But Leah often lingered on the outskirts, her presence unnoticed, her heart heavy with a loneliness she could not name. Her father Laban's household revolved around her younger sister Rachel, whose beauty was a constant topic of admiration among the villagers. Rachel's skin glowed with a golden warmth, her dark eyes sparkled with a vitality that drew people to her, and her thick, glossy hair cascaded in waves that seemed to catch the sunlight itself. She moved with a grace that made even the simplest tasks, like carrying a jar of water or tending to the lambs, seem like a dance, her laughter a melody that filled the compound with life. Leah, by contrast, felt like a shadow, her own features softer and less striking, her dark brown eyes dulled by the constant comparison to her sister, her skin, tanned from hours under the unrelenting sun, bore the faint scars of hard labor, and her long chestnut hair, though thick, was kept in a simple braid that hung down her back, unadorned and practical. She wore a plain tunic of wool, its beige fabric faded from countless washings, the hem frayed where it brushed against the rocky ground, a reflection of her own unassuming existence. Leah's role in the household was one of duty, her days a cycle of chores that kept the family fed. She rose before dawn, her hands kneading dough to bake flatbreads over the open fire, the heat of the flames reddening her cheeks as she worked in silence. She ground grain into flour with a stone mortar, her arms aching from the repetitive motion, her breath steady despite the exhaustion that clung to her like a second skin. She wove wool into sturdy fabric on a wooden loom, her fingers deft but uncelebrated, the rhythm of the shuttle a quiet meditation that allowed her mind to wander. She carried water from the well in heavy jars, balancing them on her shoulder. As she walked the dusty path back to the compound, her steps careful to avoid spilling a single drop, her shoulders stooped under the weight. The other women at the well often ignored her, their conversations turning to Rachel's latest suitor, or the way her beauty had caught the eye of a passing trader. And Leah would stand apart, her hands gripping the jar, her eyes fixed on the ground, her heart sinking with each word. Laban himself paid little attention to Leah, his focus consumed by Rachel, whom he saw as a prize to be bartered for the highest bidder. He would sit in the shade of the largest tent, his robes spread around him, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile as he watched Rachel tend to the lambs, her movements fluid and captivating. He spoke often of her future, of the wealth and status she would bring to the family through a good marriage. his voice booming with pride as he recounted her virtues to anyone who would listen. Leah, meanwhile, was an afterthought, her contributions to the household taken for granted, her presence barely acknowledged. She would pass by her father with a basket of freshly baked bread or a bundle of spun wool, her steps quiet, her eyes averted, and Laban would scarcely glance her way, his attention already returning to Rachel, who laughed nearby, her voice like a song on the wind. Leah felt the sting of his indifference, a quiet ache that settled deep within her, but she buried it beneath layers of duty, her hands never still, her prayers whispered in the solitude of her tasks. At night, when the day's work was done, Leah would sit outside the tent, her knees drawn up, her hands resting in her lap as she gazed at the star-strewn sky. The air was cooler then, the heat of the day giving way to a gentle breeze that rustled the sparse grass and carried the distant howl of a jackal. She wore a simple shawl over her tunic, its edges frayed from years of use, the beige fabric blending into the shadows as she sat in silence. Her dark brown eyes traced the constellations, her thoughts turning to the dreams she had once held of a husband who would see her, truly see her, and a family that would fill her days with love. But those dreams felt distant now, overshadowed by the reality of her sister's radiance, and Leah's prayers were tinged with a quiet longing, a plea for a future where she might be more than a shadow. She clasped her hands together, her fingers rough against her palms, and closed her eyes, her whispered prayers rising into the night, a fragile hope that God might hear her. One morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, a stranger arrived at the compound, his arrival sending a ripple of excitement through the household. His name was Jacob, a young shepherd who had fled from his brother Esau, seeking refuge with his uncle Laban. He stood tall, his skin bronzed from days under the sun, his dark eyes sharp and searching as he surveyed the land. Leah watched from the edge of the tent, her hands stilling on the loom as she took in his rugged features, her heart stirring with a flicker of curiosity. But Jacob's gaze quickly found Rachel, who was drawing water from the well, her movements effortless, her beauty luminous in the morning light. His face softened, his eyes lighting with an intensity that Leah had never seen directed at her, and she felt her stomach twist, a familiar pang of invisibility settling over her. Jacob approached Rachel, his steps eager, his attention wholly consumed by her, and Leah turned back to her work, her hands moving mechanically, her heart sinking as she realized that her life was about to change, but not in the way she had hoped. Jacob labored for 7 years under Laban's watchful eye, sun-scorched pastures of Haran, all for the promise of Rachel's hand in marriage. The years passed in a blur of sweat and toil, his hands calloused from guiding the flocks, his skin darkened by the relentless sun, his heart sustained by the thought of the woman he loved. Leah watched from the sidelines, her own days unchanged, her hands still busy with the endless tasks of the household, spinning wool, grinding grain, and carrying water, her presence as unnoticed as ever. She saw the way Jacob looked at Rachel, his eyes alight with a tenderness that made her chest ache, and she buried her longing deep within her, her prayers for a different life growing quieter with each passing season. Her beige tunic, now patched in places where the fabric had worn thin, bore the stains of her labor, and her chestnut hair, though neatly braided, was streaked with dust. a testament to her unceasing work under the desert sun. When the 7 years were complete, the compound buzzed with preparations for the wedding. The air filled with the scent of roasting meat and the sound of laughter as the family gathered to celebrate. Torches were lit as the sun dipped below the horizon, their flames casting a warm glow over the gathering, the flickering light dancing on the faces of the guests who sat on woven mats, their voices rising in song. Leah helped with the preparations, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged platters of bread and dates, her heart heavy with a mixture of dread and resignation. She wore a simple tunic, its beige fabric unadorned, her shawl draped over her shoulders to ward off the evening chill. Her dark brown eyes darted toward Rachel, who stood at the center of the celebration, her beauty radiant in a finely woven dress dyed in shades of indigo, her dark hair adorned with wildflowers, her laughter a melody that drew smiles from all who heard it. Leah felt the familiar sting of comparison, her own features plain in contrast, her presence overshadowed by the sister who had always been the light of their father's house. As the night deepened, Laban executed his deceit, a plan born of tradition and cunning that would forever alter Leah's life. Under the cover of darkness, with the guests distracted by wine and song, he led Leah to the bridal tent, her face hidden beneath a heavy veil that obscured her features. Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic rhythm that echoed her fear and shame, her hands clutching the edges of the veil as if it could shield her from the truth of what was happening. The tent was dimly lit by a single oil lamp, its flickering flame casting shadows on the woven walls, the air inside thick with the scent of wool and the faint sweetness of myrrh. Leah's breath came in shallow gasps, her body trembling as she stepped inside, her sandals brushing against the soft rug that lined the floor. She stood there, her eyes fixed on the ground, her tears soaking into the veil, her mind a whirlwind of emotions, fear of discovery, shame at her father's deception, and a desperate hope that Jacob might somehow see her worth. Jacob entered the tent, his steps eager, his mind filled with thoughts of Rachel, unaware of the switch that had taken place. The night passed in a haze for Leah, her body stiff with tension, her hands clenched into fists as she lay beside him, her tears silent but unending. The veil remained in place, a barrier that hid her identity, and she clung to the darkness, dreading the moment of revelation. When morning came, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the tent's entrance, casting a golden glow over the scene, and Jacob stirred, his eyes blinking open as he turned to the woman beside him. His expression shifted from contentment to confusion, then to anger as he pulled back the veil, revealing Leah's face, her dark brown eyes wide with fear, her cheeks flushed with humiliation. She sat up, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of her tunic, her hair falling loose from its braid, framing her face in a tangled mess as she braced herself for his reaction. Jacob's fury was immediate, his body tensing as he rose to his feet, his hands clenched into fists as he stormed out of the tent to confront Laban. Leah remained where she was, her knees drawn to her chest, her arms wrapped around herself as if to shield her heart from the rejection she knew was coming. Her tears fell freely now, soaking the rug beneath her, her breath hitching with each sob as the weight of her father's betrayal settled over her. She heard the shouts outside, Jacob's voice sharp with anger, Laban's calm and calculated as he explained the custom of marrying off the eldest daughter first. His words a justification that offered no comfort to Leah. Her hands shook as she wiped her face, her fingers brushing against her tear-streaked cheeks, her eyes red and swollen as she tried to compose herself, the shame of the night burning in her chest. When Jacob returned, his anger had not abated, but he was bound by the agreement. Laban proposed another 7 years of labor for Rachel, whom he truly loved. Leah sat in silence, her body still, her eyes fixed on the ground, as Jacob looked at her with a coldness that cut deeper than any words could. She felt the weight of his resentment, a heavy burden that pressed down on her already fragile spirit. And she knew that her marriage would be one of duty, not love. Later that week, when Rachel was given to Jacob as his second wife, the celebration was even grander, the air filled with joy that Leah could not share. She stood at the edge of the gathering, her beige tunic blending into the shadows, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders as she watched Jacob and Rachel together, their happiness a stark contrast to her own isolation. Her hands clasped together, her fingers rough against her palms, and she turned away, retreating to her tent, her prayers now tinged with a bitter longing for a love she feared she would never know. Leah sought solace in the one hope she could cling to: motherhood, believing that bearing children might finally win her the love of Jacob, or at least give her a purpose beyond the shadows of her marriage. The years following her wedding unfolded in the sprawling encampment of Jacob's growing household, a collection of tents pitched on the outskirts of Haran, surrounded by dusty plains and herds of grazing sheep. The air was thick with the scent of wool and the faint tang of smoke from the cooking fires, the sounds of bleating lambs and the laughter of children, a constant backdrop to daily life. Leah's tent, though modest, became her sanctuary, its woven walls adorned with simple tapestries she had made herself, the interior warmed by a small clay brazier that glowed softly in the evenings. Her beige tunic, now patched and faded from years of wear, bore the stains of her labor flour from baking, dye from weaving, and the dust of the desert that clung to everything, but she wore it with a quiet dignity, her chestnut hair braided neatly down her back, a small act of care in a life marked by struggle. Her prayers for children were answered with a swiftness that felt like a divine mercy, and Leah's heart swelled with hope as she felt the first stirrings of life within her. She gave birth to her firstborn, Reuben, in the dim light of her tent, her body slick with sweat, her hands gripping the woven mat beneath her as she brought him into the world. The infant's cries filled the air, a piercing sound that brought tears of joy to her eyes, and she cradled him against her chest, her dark brown eyes tracing his tiny features, searching for a sign of Jacob in his face. She named him Reuben, meaning "see, a son," her heart whispering a silent prayer that this child would make Jacob see her, truly see her, as a wife worthy of his love. She wrapped him in a soft cloth she had woven herself, its edges frayed but warm, and held him close, the scent of milk and newborn skin filling her senses as she rocked him gently, her lips pressed to his forehead in a tender kiss. The years that followed brought more sons, each birth a moment of triumph for Leah, a flicker of hope that Jacob might soften toward her. Simeon came next, his name meaning "he has heard," a reflection of Leah's belief that God had heard her cries for love, even if her husband had not. Then Levi, whose name spoke of her longing to be joined to Jacob in heart as well as in duty, and finally Judah, meaning praise, a name that marked a shift in Leah's spirit as she began to turn her gratitude toward God rather than her elusive husband. Each child was a blessing, their small bodies filling her tent with life, their laughter a balm to her wounded heart. She spent her days tending to them, her hands gentle as she washed their faces with water from a clay basin, her fingers deft as she mended their tunics with careful stitches, her voice soft as she sang them lullabies in the evenings, the firelight casting shadows on their sleeping forms. Her tent became a haven of warmth and love, the scent of baking bread mingling with the earthy smell of wool, the air filled with the sounds of her sons playing, their voices a chorus that drowned out the silence of Jacob's indifference. Yet, despite the joy her children brought her, Leah's longing for Jacob's love remained unfulfilled, a quiet ache that lingered beneath the surface of her daily life. She watched him from the entrance of her tent, her hands resting on the woven flap, her dark brown eyes following his movements as he sat with Rachel under the shade of an acacia tree, their laughter a melody that pierced her heart. Jacob's attention was always on Rachel, his eyes soft with a tenderness that Leah had never known, his hands gentle as he brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. Rachel, though still childless, remained the center of his world, her beauty undimmed by the years, her presence a constant reminder of Leah's own inadequacy in his eyes. Leah's hands tightened on the flap, her knuckles whitening with the force of her grip, her chestnut hair slipping from its braid to frame her face as she turned away, her tears hidden from her sons, who played nearby, their small hands tossing pebbles in a game of their own making. In the evenings, when the camp settled into a quiet rhythm, Leah would sit by the fire, her sons gathered around her, their small bodies pressed against hers as they listened to the stories she told tales of their ancestors, of Abraham and Sarah, of God's promises to their people. She held Judah on her lap, his dark curls tickling her chin, while Reuben and Simeon wrestled playfully at her feet, their laughter filling the tent with warmth. Levi, the quietest of her boys, sat close, his small hand resting on her knee, his eyes wide as he listened to her words. Leah's hands moved gently, smoothing their hair, wiping dirt from their cheeks, her touch a constant reassurance of her love. But as the fire died down and the boys drifted to sleep, she would sit alone, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the glowing embers, her heart heavy with the knowledge that Jacob's love remained out of reach. She prayed in the stillness, her hands clasped together, her fingers rough against her palms, her whispered pleas rising into the night, asking God not only for Jacob's affection, but for the strength to find peace in the love she already had, love of her sons, the love of her Creator. The years of longing and prayer culminated for Rachel when she finally conceived, her joy a radiant light that seemed to illuminate the entire encampment. But for Leah, the moment brought a bitter pang that threatened to unravel the fragile peace she had built. The air in the camp was thick with anticipation, the scent of blooming wildflowers mingling with the earthy aroma of grazing sheep as the family prepared for the arrival of Rachel's first child. The tents stood clustered on a sun-baked plain, their beige walls weathered by the elements, the horizon stretching endlessly in shades of gold and brown under a cloudless sky. Rachel's tent, larger and more finely woven than Leah's, was a hive of activity, the women of the household bustling in and out, their hands carrying clay jars of water and bundles of clean cloth, their faces alight with excitement for the favored wife of Jacob. Leah watched from the edge of her own tent, her hands gripping the woven flap, her chestnut hair falling loose from its braid, framing a face that bore the weight of years of toil and quiet sorrow. Her dark brown eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before her. Rachel's labor began at dawn, the first cries of pain echoing through the camp as the sun rose, casting a golden glow over the landscape. She lay on a mat inside her tent, her body glistening with sweat, her dark hair plastered to her forehead, her hands clutching the edges of the mat as she endured the contractions. The women gathered around her, their movements swift and practiced, their hands gentle as they wiped her brow with damp cloths and arranged cushions to support her back. Jacob was at her side, his presence a constant source of comfort, his hands holding hers, his face etched with a mixture of worry and hope, his dark eyes never leaving her. The tent was filled with the scent of myrrh and the faint tank of sweat, the air heavy with the intensity of the moment, the woven walls glowing softly in the morning light that filtered through the gaps. Rachel's beauty, though strained by the labor, remained undeniable, her golden skin flushed with effort, her features a testament to the strength that lay beneath her delicate exterior. Leah stood apart, her beige tunic patched and faded, its hem frayed from years of use, her shawl draped loosely over her shoulders as she watched the flurry of activity from a distance, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms, her heart twisting with a jealousy she could not suppress. She had borne Jacob 4 sons, each one a hope for his love. But his attention had never wavered from Rachel, and now, with the promise of her first child, his devotion seemed to deepen, a bond that excluded Leah entirely. She saw the way Jacob looked at Rachel, his eyes filled with a pride and tenderness that Leah had never known, his hands gentle as he brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, his body leaning close as if to shield her from the pain. Leah's breath caught in her throat, her eyes stinging with unshed tears, her chest tight with an ache that threatened to overwhelm her. She turned her gaze to the ground, her hands smoothing the fabric of her tunic, her fingers trembling as she tried to steady herself, the weight of her own inadequacy pressing down on her like a stone. As the labor progressed, Rachel's cries grew louder, her body trembling with the effort, her hands gripping Jacob's with a desperation that spoke of her struggle. The women worked tirelessly, their hands moving with purpose, their faces tense with concentration as they supported her through each contraction. The sun climbed higher, its heat seeping into the tent, the air growing stifling despite the efforts to keep it cool with damp cloths draped over the entrance. Finally, after hours of labor, the cries of a newborn pierced the air, a sharp, clear sound that brought a collective sigh of relief from the women inside. Rachel's body relaxed, her chest heaving with exhaustion, her face pale but glowing with a quiet triumph as she looked down at the infant in her arms. The boy, named Joseph, was small but healthy, his tiny fists waving in the air, his cries softening as Rachel cradled him close, her tears of joy mingling with the sweat on her cheeks, his hands gentle as he touched the child's head, his eyes shining with a love that left no room for anyone else. Leah watched from outside, her body still, her hands now limp at her sides, her dark brown eyes fixed on the scene unfolding within the tent. She saw Jacob lift Joseph into his arms, his movements careful, his face alight with a joy that Leah had never seen when her own sons were born. He held the child up, his voice filled with wonder as he gazed at him, his love for Rachel and their son, a tangible force that seemed to exclude the rest of the world. Rachel, though weakened by the labor, smiled up at him, her beauty undimmed, her golden skin glowing in the soft light, her dark hair framing her face like a halo. The women around them murmured blessings, their hands busy as they cleaned up, their faces filled with joy for the new mother and her child. Leah felt a tear slip down her cheek, her hand rising to wipe it away, the rough fabric of her sleeve brushing against her skin as she fought to maintain her composure. Her sons playing nearby, oblivious to their mother's pain, unable to bear. The sun was high now, its heat relentless, the air shimmering with the intensity of the day. But Leah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She reached the riverbank, the sound of the water rushing over smooth stones, a gentle counterpoint to the turmoil in her heart, and sank to her knees, her beige tunic pooling around her on the dusty ground. The shade of a lone willow tree offered some relief, its branches drooping low, their leaves brushing the water's surface. And Leah leaned against its trunk, her hands covering her face as her tears fell freely. Her chestnut hair clung to her wet cheeks, her body trembling with the force of her emotions, her prayers rising in a desperate plea for the strength to endure this new wound. She felt the weight of her loneliness more acutely than ever, her heart aching for a love she feared she would never know. Her sons her only solace in a world that seemed to have no place for her. As the years unfolded in Jacob's encampment, Leah gradually found a semblance of peace in her role as a mother, her heart slowly mending through the love she poured into her growing family. The camp had expanded, its cluster of tents now a bustling settlement on the plains of Haran, surrounded by sprawling pastures where sheep grazed under the watchful eyes of Jacob's hired shepherds. The air was filled with the scent of fresh grass. After a rare rain, the earth soft beneath the feet of the children who ran between the tents, their laughter a constant melody that brought a quiet smile to Leah's lips. Her tent, though modest, was a haven of warmth, its woven walls adorned with tapestries she had crafted over the years, their patterns simple but vibrant, the interior lit by the soft glow of a clay lamp that burned steadily each evening. Leah's beige tunic, now patched in several places, bore the marks of her tireless work stains from cooking, threads frayed from kneeling to tend to her children, but she wore it with a newfound dignity. Her chestnut hair, streaked with the first strands of gray, neatly braided and tucked beneath a shawl that shielded her from the sun. Leah's days settled into a rhythm of quiet purpose, her hands always busy, her heart finding solace in the small joys of motherhood. She sat by the fire each evening, her children gathered around her, their small bodies pressed against hers, as they listened to her stories, the flames casting a warm glow on their faces. She held Dinah on her lap, her fingers smoothing her daughter's dark hair, while Issachar and Zebulon wrestled playfully at her feet, their laughter filling the tent with life. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, now growing into young men, sat close, their eyes bright with curiosity as they listened to her tales, their hands resting on her knees in a gesture of affection. Leah's face, lined with the marks of a life hard-lived, glowed with a quiet strength, her dark brown eyes reflecting the firelight. Her prayers now filled with gratitude for the family she had built, her heart at peace with the path God had chosen. For her, the years brought profound changes to Jacob's household, and Leah's role within it evolved as she faced both loss and newfound purpose in the twilight of her life. The encampment had moved from Haran to the land of Canaan, settling near Hebron, where the air was cooler. The landscape dotted with rolling hills and ancient oak trees, their branches heavy with leaves that rustled in the evening breeze. The tents, now weathered by years of travel, stood in a wide circle, their beige walls faded to a soft gray, the ground beneath them worn smooth by the footsteps of a growing family. Leah's tent remained a central hub, its interior filled with the scent of baking bread and the faint aroma of wool. The walls adorned with tapestries that told the story of her life through their intricate patterns, woven by her own hands over decades. Her beige tunic, patched and threadbare, hung loosely on her frame, her chestnut hair now fully streaked with gray, braided with care each morning, a small act of dignity in her advancing years. Tragedy struck when Rachel died, giving birth to her second son, Benjamin, her frail body unable to withstand the strain of labor. Her final moments marked by a quiet gasp as she slipped away under the starlit sky. The camp was shrouded in grief, the air heavy with the scent of myrrh burned in her honor. The silence, broken only by the soft cries of the newborn and Jacob's anguished sobs as he held her lifeless form. Leah stood at the edge of the tent, her hands clasped tightly together, her dark brown eyes filled with tears as she watched the women prepare Rachel's body for burial. Wrapping her in a shroud of fine linen, her once radiant beauty now still and pale. Despite the years of rivalry, Leah felt a deep sorrow for her sister, her heart aching for the loss of the woman who had been both her rival and her companion. Their shared struggles forging a bond that death could not erase. She stepped forward to help, her hands steady as she smoothed the shroud, her tears falling silently onto the fabric. Her grief a quiet tribute to the sister she had come to understand. With Rachel gone, Leah became Jacob's only wife, a role that brought with it a new responsibility as she took on the care of Rachel's sons, Joseph and Benjamin, raising them alongside her own children with the same fierce love that had defined her motherhood. She welcomed them into her tent, her hands gentle as she wiped tears from their faces, her voice soft as she sang them the lullabies she had once sung to her own sons, the firelight casting a warm glow on their small forms as they slept. Joseph, now a young man, carried the weight of his mother's memory, his dark eyes so like Rachel's, and Leah saw in him the beauty that had once captivated Jacob, her heart softening as she guided him through his grief. Benjamin, still a child, clung to her, his small hands grasping her tunic, his cries easing as she rocked him, her chestnut hair falling loose to brush against his cheek, her presence a steady anchor in his world of loss. Leah's tent became a sanctuary for all of Jacob's children, the air filled with the laughter of her grandchildren, their small feet pattering on the rugs as they played, their voices a testament to the family she had nurtured. Jacob, now an old man with a white beard and weathered hands, began to see Leah with a clarity that had eluded him in their younger years, his heart softening toward the woman who had stood by him through decades of hardship. he sat with her. In the evenings, his body stooped with age, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight as he watched her with their children. Her hands still busy with mending or weaving, her face lined with the marks of a life hard-lived but glowing with a quiet strength. He saw the way her sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun sought her counsel, their voices respectful as they spoke of their herds and their families, their hands resting on her shoulders in gestures of affection. He saw the way Dinah, now a young woman, sat at her side, her hands mirroring Leah's as they wove together, their laughter a melody that filled the tent with warmth. Jacob's love for Rachel had never dimmed, but he came to appreciate Leah's steadfast presence, his gratitude a silent bond that grew between them. Their shared history a foundation for a quiet companionship in their later years. Leah's final days were spent surrounded by her family, her body weakened by age but her spirit unbowed, her dark brown eyes still bright with the faith that had carried her through a lifetime of trials. She lay on a mat in her tent, her hands resting on her chest, her fingers tracing the frayed edges of her tunic, her breath shallow but steady as her children and grandchildren gathered around her. The air was filled with the scent of myrrh and the soft murmur of prayers, the tent glowing with the light of a single lamp that cast shadows on the woven walls. Her sons knelt at her side, their faces etched with love and sorrow, their hands holding hers as they whispered their farewells, their voices a chorus of gratitude for the mother who had given them life. Dinah sat closest, her dark hair falling over her shoulder as she leaned down to kiss Leah's forehead, her tears falling onto her mother's weathered cheek, her hands trembling as she smoothed the gray strands of her hair. Leah's eyes closed, her lips curving into a faint smile, her heart at peace as she slipped away, her legacy secure in the family she had built. Leah was buried beside Jacob in the cave of Machpelah, her body laid to rest in the land of their fathers, her name etched into the history of their people as the mother of tribes that would shape the future of Israel. Her sons became the fathers of the 12 tribes, their descendants carrying her bloodline through the generations, her influence echoing in the stories of their people. Judah, her 4th son, would give rise to a line of kings, his lineage leading to David and, centuries later, to the Messiah. A legacy that Leah could not have foreseen, but that was born of her faith and perseverance. Her life, marked by rejection and struggle, became a testament to the power of a mother's love. Her name remembered not as the unloved wife, but as the matriarch whose children changed the course of history. Her story a beacon of hope for those who find strength in the shadows.